Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that, of course, I would talk about this video and talk about the most recent boxing fight that ended up happening, which unfortunately I could not watch, at least when it transpired at the current moment in time or when it was live, between that of Tszyu and apparently one of the newer champions at the 154-pound weight class, Mr. Bakram, who I've only recently heard about. I don't really know a whole lot about him, but of course, what I've recently figured out about him is that not, of course, only was he able to beat Tszyu today by dominant stoppage, but on top of that, the man is undefeated. He is, I believe, one of the champions there at the 154-pound weight class. And when it came to Tszyu, I was never really quite sure whether to label him as an A grade level fighter or a B grade level fighter because of his level of competition. I never really thought that his level of competition was super duper elite in my personal view. He's a relatively skilled fighter, but he's also a relatively flawed fighter. At times he can be a little bit stiff. Sometimes he keeps one hand down when he throws certain exchanges. And that's exactly what caught him tonight against Mr. Bakram in certain exchanges. And Tszyu likes to be in those 50-50 level exchanges. He really likes to counter, overall after you throw certain punches. He tried to exchange with Bakram, and Bakram must have seen the right hand go down when Tszyu was trying to come back up with the left hook. Bakram kept his right hand up, at least it seemed more than what a Tszyu did. He caught him with a left hook and he hurt him very, very badly. And I don't think that Tszyu really was ever able to fully recover. And I believe that this fight was stopped after about 4 rounds. I believe it was 4 rounds. Tszyu was never able to fully recover. And of course, I'm a little bit surprised because Tszyu, in my personal view, I thought he put up a little bit of a better fight. And on top of that, Tszyu always appeared to at least have a very, very decent chin. Even though, of course, he always had the capability, overall of getting knocked down. We've seen it against Terrell Gausha and possibly even against another fighter I can't remember. But I think after this that it does have to be confirmed that Tszyu more than likely is a B grade level fighter. And Bakram, when I take a look at him, he looks like somewhat of a talented fighter, but I don't know if I would really go as far to claim him to be an A grade level fighter. When I take a look at him, he comes across as relatively slow. He also at times comes across as a bit too hittable. He does not appear to me, at least, to have quick feet. Now, this could have just been this one fight, to be fair. I've never really heard about this man before. But when I took a look at him in this fight, I was not super duper impressed with him. He looked like a solid B grade level fighter, but really nothing above that in my personal view. But a big part of the reason why I wanted to review this video is because A, I'm going to have to start checking out the 154-pound weight class a little bit more now that you have names like Crawford and Madrimov and Bakram and of course Virgil Ortiz and Jamel Charlo and possibly even Jerome Boutsenis moving up there in the future. Who knows? All those guys, are there, and it could be very particularly interesting. But a big part of the reason why I also wanted to review this video is because Mr. AKHi TV, like regular, is going to try and insert a seed into certain people's brains overall with certain propaganda. And of course, one of their main objectives is to make Terrence Bud Crawford look like he is this Floyd Mayweather type figure, which in my view, Terrence Bud Crawford never has been, at least when you talk about the quote-unquote full package. Meaning what? That Terrence Bud Crawford does not have anywhere near the resume of a Floyd Mayweather Jr. What these guys like AKHi TV and Dante's Boxing Nation keep trying to, tell you guys is that Terrence Bud Crawford has this extraordinary resume, and he just does not. He's never had an extraordinary resume. He has added on to it, of course, a little bit. But in my view, once again, Terrence Bud Crawford has about 5 total A-grade level wins, and even that is a little bit debatable. I give him credit once again for Yuriorkis Gamboa. I give him credit for Victor Postal. I give him credit for Sean Porter. I give him credit for Errol Spence Jr. And I give him credit for Israel Madrimov. Now, of course, is there other B-grade level fighters that I, of course, can give him credit for? Yeah, more than likely, probably. But when you talk about legitimate A-grade level fighters, those that pretty much is the max amount of fighters at the max that I can really give Terrence Bud Crawford A-grade level credit. And it's possible, of course, that, maybe when it comes to that of a Bakram, that he also is an A-grade level fighter as well. But I'm going to have to see that. But the thing is that AKHi TV, he's going to make a slight comparison. He's going to make a comparison with Madrimov and Bakram to them somewhat being like Artur and Dmitry Bivol. And of course, certain people may say, well, he's just making that comparison because, he's trying to make it seem like, you have, 2 Russian or Eastern European fighters in that weight class. No, what AKHi TV and Dante and some of these other guys are going to try to do is that they're going to try to spread the propaganda that these guys are just as good as Artur and Israel Madrimov. For those of you, of course, that remember when Crawford was entering into the fight against Israel Madrimov, AKHi TV and Dante were already on their bullshit, talking about how Israel Madrimov was so much like Gennady Golovkin, and the only reason why he's not ranked as high as Golovkin is because he doesn't get as much promotion, blah, blah, blah. Even though Gennady Golovkin, keep in mind that the man had like 22 to 23 middleweight title defenses in total, was knocking everybody out in that weight class. Not elite level competition, of course, usually, but when it came down to it, was clearly the #1 guy in that weight class. All right, when you talk about overall Terrence Bud Crawford, he's never really beat anyone that's been #1 in the weight class, pretty much other than Errol Spence Jr. Now, of course, between him and Victor Postol, that was the fight pretty much between who was going to be the best. So, I mean, you can give him Victor Postol. And, of course, Gamboa was looked at as the best in certain weight classes as well. But when Gamboa, fought Terrence Bud Crawford, it was kind of, it really was not his natural weight class. But, you can give him Gamboa as well, if you want to. But once again, let's pump the brakes a little bit on comparing Madrimov and Bakram to that of an Artur Beterbiev versus Dmitry Bivol, or those fighters, just because you want to make Crawford's resume seem that much better than what it actually is. And those guys, very potentially could be A-grade level fighters, but we need to see Israel Madrimov, and we need to see that of a Bakram against legit A-grade level fighters. And who are the legit A-grade level fighters of that weight class? Probably Terrence Bud Crawford, maybe Jermell Charlo if he comes back, probably a Virgil Ortiz in my personal view, maybe a Jaron Boots Ennis if he actually makes a run up there, and of course, possibly Israel Madrimov. But I still don't know really how good Israel Madrimov is because he hasn't really ever fought anybody, so we'll see what happens. But of course, he did give Terrence Bud Crawford one hell of a fight. I thought that it was 7 rounds to 5 for Terrence Bud Crawford. He did give Crawford a lot of problems in that fight. He was tagging him. So I'll give Israel Madrimov the credit of A-grade level, but it is what it is. But anyways, I just thought that I would talk about it. I thought that it was interesting. Let's get into it. Let's see what Mr. AKHi TV has to say.
Congratulations to the champion Bekram for knocking out Tszyu in the 3rd round. Tszyu, leading up to the fight, he was talking about everyone but his opponent Bekram. And tonight, it showed why you shouldn't overlook your opponent. Bekram was a fighter just like Beterbiev and Bivol. I mean, we have like the Beterbiev and Bivol kind of at 154, and that's...
No, sir, no, we do not. The only comparisons that you can really have between those two fighters is that, they are both Eastern European fighters. Other than that, there's really not much of a comparison that you can have. When you talk about accomplishments, when you talk about resume, they're not even close. It is what it is. But once again, the reason why AKHi TV is doing this is because they have to try to make it seem like Terrence Bud Crawford is for sure the best of his era without there even being a contest. And even they realize themselves that Crawford does not have the best of resumes, at least when you compare him, to a Floyd Mayweather or a Manny Pacquiao or some of these other guys, and they also realize that he does not have the resume of a Canelo Alvarez. And they realize this. They can state all this bullshit all they want to about Canelo apparently fighting these weak European white boys, but they realize that Canelo Alvarez has an A-grade level resume and has about a dozen A-grade level names on his list. They realize that. That's why, once again, they have to try to make it seem like Crawford is always fighting these A-grade level fighters, even when they're not A-grade level fighters. It is what it is. All right? But once again, and it's very potential. It's a great potentiality that, once again, Israel Madrimov could be an A-grade level fighter. I give him the grade of A-grade just because of the fight that he was able to give Crawford. And, of course, because of his relatively great skill set. But, Bakram, I'm going to have to see. Because when I take a look at him, he seems like a decent fighter. But he also seems very slow. He seems hittable. He does not appear to have the quickest feet to me. I do not believe, in my personal view, that he's an A-grade level fighter. But I could be wrong. Because in my view, Tszyu was always debatably an A- to B grade level fighter anyway. I was never really quite sure how good he actually was because he never really got in the ring with anybody other than that of a Tony Harrison. And I mean, Tony Harrison has never really been an A-grade level fighter anyway. Tony Harrison, of course, pretty much was known for losing every big fight in his career by stoppage to that of Jarrett Hurd and also that somebody else, I believe, before that of Jermell Charlo. when it came down to it. And then, of course, he gave Jermell Charlo, a hell of a time. But I mean, when it comes to Jermell Charlo, this is just my personal view. Jermell Charlo did deserve at one point in time to be on the top 10 pound for pound list, or at least right there along with some of the other fighters. But when you talk about an undisputed champion, Jermell Charlo probably had the most overrated skill set, probably out of any other undisputed champion that I've seen, at least currently within this era. I mean, every other undisputed champion that I know of has a better skill set, or in my view, was more dominant than that of Jermell Charlo. Whether you want to talk about Terrence Crawford, Naoya Inoue, Alexander Usyk, or whether you want to talk about Canelo Alvarez, whether you want to talk about, Devin Haney, whether you want to talk about some of these other guys, Josh Taylor, all those guys, in my view, at their absolute peak, they were more talented, at least skill-wise, than that of a Jermell Charlo. That's why Jermell Charlo had such a tough time against Brian Gastano, who's a decent amount smaller than him, by the way, when it comes down to it. And then, of course, overall, he lost to Tony Harrison. And that's why these guys, even though they were talking all that shit about how Canelo was, allegedly such this limited fighter, blah, 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 and Jermell Charlo should be top 5 pound for pound. That's why when Jermell Charlo went in the fight against Canelo, and I understand that he was going up in 2 weight classes against Canelo Alvarez, but Jermell Charlo really should be fighting at 160 anyways. And on top of that, Canelo's not a natural 168 pounder anyway. Now, is the weight acclimation, of course, a valid excuse a little bit for Jermell Charlo? Yes, it is. But it was not as much of a factor as what a lot of people are trying to make it out to be. Just take a look at the size between those two guys. They're pretty much the same size on that fight. And Jermell Charlo, I believe, rehydrated a couple pounds heavier than that of Canelo Alvarez, for those of you that, want to keep bringing up that point. But, I mean, once again, he could have just used that to balloon up and wait a little bit. But once again, that's why all of these guys, even though they love to talk all that shit about how Canelo is allegedly this super limited fighter, that's what none of them picked Jermell Charlo. Absolutely none of them, because they knew what was going to happen in that fight. They know who Jermell Charlo is, and they know who Canelo Alvarez is.
Madrimov and Bekram.
And they know the difference in skill sets.
Bekram was too strong, too good for Tszyu. The 154-pound division is heating up. Of course, we have pound for pound number 1.
It definitely is heating up a little bit. And it's going to get very particularly interesting once again, especially with Terrence Bud Crawford in that weight class. Now, I'm not really quite sure how many of the champions, other than that of course, the former champion Madrimov and Terrence Bud Crawford, I'm not really quite sure how many of the current champions there are legitimately A-grade level fighters, because I wouldn't really count Sebastian Fundora as an A-grade level fighter. It might be an A-grade level win, for example, if Crawford can still get the win, not because of my personal view that Sebastian Fundora is an A-grade skilled level fighter, but pretty much just because of his size. I mean, man, there's no way you should be 6'6" and fighting overall at the 154-pound weight class. I mean, that's just ridiculous. The man obviously is a complete weight bully. It is what it is. But at the end of the day, the man can still fit there. So of course, if Crawford, who's a decent amount smaller than that, at least in certainly in terms of height and weight, or excuse me, at least in terms of height and reach, if Crawford, of course, can win that fight, which I would predict him to more than likely, but you never know, the size could be an issue, then, of course, you could at least count that as an A- level win, or at least a solid B-grade level win. It'd be up to you. Now, of course, if Canelo got in the ring with them, for example, then it'd probably be a B-grade level win. But at the end of the day, for Crawford, just because of his size alone, it might be an A-grade level win for him. Bakram, I'm not really quite sure. I mean, I need to see more of him. I'll need to watch a little bit more fights of him, but to be quite honest with you, even though, of course, he took out Tszyu in somewhat of impressive fashion, I was not, looking at a fighter that, in my view, was just, superb.
In the entire sport, Crawford in the division. There's Virgil Ortiz, Fundora, Madrimov, and, of course, Bekram. We even have the old dogs like Jermell Charlo and Castino still lurking in the background.
I think you mean Castano. Who the fuck is Castino? What the fuck is this man talking about? It's Brian Castano, or Castano, however you pronounce it. It's definitely not Castino.
Therefore, it will be lovely to see all these fighters mixing it up at 154. Even Jaron Ennis jumping in the mix. Nevertheless,
that would be very interesting to see if Jaron Boots Ennis could go to 154, but I'm not really quite sure if Jaron Boots Ennis is going to do that. It appears that Jaron Boots Ennis is more focused at 147, and more than likely he probably should be.
Congratulations to Bekram, and hopefully Tszyu comes out safe and can recover well from this devastating loss that he didn't see coming, nor a lot of fans.
I'm not really quite sure if Tszyu is going to recover well from this fight, because in my personal view, Tszyu, I probably would have not favored him over Virgil Ortiz in my personal view. And to be quite honest with you, after this, I would not really favor him over any of the elite fighters at the 154-pound weight class. I don't think that he's going to recover from this well. And in my personal view, Tszyu was never really a extraordinarily or an exceptionally skilled fighter anyway. I thought that he was relatively skilled, but he's also a bit stiff. In my personal view, he drops, his hands sometimes when he throws certain punches. That's a big part of the reason why Bakram, was able to get him with the left hook throughout this fight, because he needed to keep his hands up in that combination. He did not multiple times. It is what it is, and Tszyu, once again, he's a tough guy, but he's not someone that I would consider an A-grade level fighter. And even his father, Tszyu, even though he was an A-grade level fighter, if you even take a look at Tszyu, even though he was a relatively great boxer, of course, he was completely undisputed, I believe, at the 140-pound weight class at one point in time. But even Tszyu, a little bit like Tszyu, Tszyu, when you take a look at him, he also had a similar problem at times being stiff as a fighter. Like when you take a look at this fight versus Zab Judah was actually lighting him up with certain punches in the first round. And of course, in the second round, overall it was going back and forth a little bit until Tszyu caught him with that right hand. But even Tszyu was a pretty stiff fighter at times. So Tszyu, I'm just not quite sure if he's going to have what it takes really to come back in an elite way, but we'll see.
This is why the sport of boxing is the theater of the unexpected. With that being said, go ahead and drop your thoughts in the comment section below. Subscribe below. And to be continued on the next episode of AKHi TV. Peace out.
Anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Congratulations to Mr. Bakram. We will see once again how good he is going to be a little bit later on down the line. It should be very particularly interesting. We'll see where he ends up going from here. But should be very interesting. The 154-pound weight class is getting very particularly interesting. But I also wanted to talk about that because you're going to see a lot of new media, especially really try to promote these two guys, Madrimov and Bakram, as being the Bivol and the art to Beterbiev of the 154-pound weight class, and they're not that. It is what it is. When you talk about Beterbiev and Bivol, you're talking about two generational talented fighters. Are these two guys two generationally talented fighters? They might be very talented, but are they top 10 pound per pound worthy talented? Probably not. So it is what it is. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for this video. I just thought that was very particularly interesting, but we will see about both of these fighters. I'm also going to be very curious to see about Mr. Israel Madrimov because he does seem like a relatively talented fighter. He's probably debatably the most talented fighter, debatably, other than Errol Spence Jr., that Crawford has probably fought in recent years. And I think that that's a part of the reason why Madrimov, of course, was able to give Crawford really such a tough go, But it is what it is. But we'll see what happens. Anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. We'll see where this goes. Should be very particularly interesting. And we'll see if maybe eventually Bakram and Madrimov, if Mr. AKHi TV, if his assertion is correct, if maybe those guys are more similar to Artur Beterbiev and Dmitry Bivol than what I'm guessing. If I personally had to guess, probably not. But we'll see what happens. Should be interesting. But that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.